Hi, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join me on this week's video. On this week's video, we're continuing with part 2 of our new discussion entitled The Medical Decision-Making System of Substantial Medical Evidence. And again, this is part 2 of this discussion. And when it comes to the topic of substantial medical evidence, I find that qualified medical evaluators as a group have a general misunderstanding of what it means to provide opinions and conclusions that qualify as substantial medical evidence. So that's number one misunderstanding. And then the second misunderstanding that qualified medical evaluators universally seem to share is a misunderstanding as to how to comport and compose your report such that your opinions can be presented to the reader of the report in such a way that they constitute substantial medical evidence. So the purpose of today's discussion is to expand upon what we talked about in our last session as to the necessity of providing opinions that qualify as substantial opinions. Now more than ever, it's more essential than ever that you provide high quality opinions. In today's discussion, I want to share with you some specific examples as to how you can do this in the body of your report and show you how this will look in the body of your report. You know, it's very, very interesting. When I talk to qualified medical evaluators about substantial medical evidence, many qualified medical evaluators seem to have a vague and general understanding of what it means, substantial medical evidence, what it means. But when I press them and push them a little bit further and I inquire as to, well, how would you do that in your report? Some qualified medical evaluators, the more enlightened of the group, will tell you, well, what you do is you just explain how and why you came up with your opinion, and that will qualify your opinion as substantial. And when I push them a little bit further and I ask them, well, how would you do that? I mean, can you show me an example as to how you would do that in the body of the report? And that's where most qualified medical evaluators get stopped in their tracks, because the difficulty is in taking the concept of substantial medical evidence, marrying the concept with your opinions and conclusions in your head, marrying those two in your head, and then putting it on paper in a coherent fashion is very, very difficult. And it's a learned skill, and it's a skill that you can learn to perfect in your reports moving forward, and that's the purpose of today's discussion. So let's begin part 2 of today's discussion, the medical decision-making system of substantial medical evidence. And let's just review a couple of key concepts about substantial medical evidence so that we're all on the same page moving forward today. Now today, it's more important than ever that you provide opinions and conclusions in your report that qualify as substantial medical evidence. And the scrutiny on our report, the scrutiny on our opinions and conclusions to confirm that they actually meet this high standard of substantial medical evidence is increasing due to some recent developments that I'll share with you in just a moment. But before I do that, I want you to imagine a scenario where a youth sports team is beginning for the very first time to learn about playing a particular sport. So, for example, let's talk about a youth football team playing football for the very first time. And the coach, in explaining how to succeed in youth football, explains to the young fellas and young ladies, young girls, that the purpose of the game is to take this football and run it down the field across the end zone line, in which case, if they can do that, when they do that, they will succeed and they will be rewarded with a touchdown, which is 6 points. Or imagine a youth hockey team, and the coach explains that the way to succeed in this game is to take the little black thing called a puck and put it down there at the end of the rink in that net down there. And do you all see that net down there? You just take this black puck and you put it in the net down there. And so the players trot out on the field or skate out on the ice, and they attempt to take their football or their hockey puck and march it down the field and down the ice and score points by getting the football across the end zone and the hockey puck in the hockey net. Well, as these youth sports enthusiasts soon learn, this is a lot more difficult than it sounds. And they invariably are going to come back, and that's when the real coaching from the coach begins. And the coach then explains to them how to do it, methods as to how to get the football down the field, methods as to how to get the hockey puck in the net. It's not enough to understand what to do. It's even more important to understand how to do it. And the purpose of today's discussion is to show you how to march the football downfield and provide opinions and conclusions in your report that actually score you points, that actually will allow you to succeed because they actually qualify as substantial medical evidence. So today's discussion is very, very practical. Now, the necessity for providing opinions and conclusions that qualify as substantial medical evidence comes out of two major historic happenings that have occurred recently. First, in 2019, the state auditor conducted an audit of the Division of Workers' Compensation, and she, meaning the state auditor, she found that over 85% of qualified medical evaluators' reports are substandard in one or more ways. And by substandard, the main flaw in qualified medical evaluators' reports that qualify them as substandard is that they fail to be able to resolve the disputed issue. And the reason that they fail to be able to resolve the disputed issue is because the qualified medical evaluators' opinions and conclusions did not rise to the usable level, the level of substantial medical evidence, which is a requirement for the opinion to be able to be used to resolve the disputed issue. Well, this is a problem because low-quality reports delay injured workers' receipt of benefits and add expenses to employers involved in disputes. So low-quality reports that are unable to resolve disputed issues, are a problem. Well, in response to this, the Division of Workers' Compensation created several committees, several groups, several subgroups of the overall committee known as the Report Quality Committee. And in addressing low-quality reports, the Division of Workers' Compensation has become more committed and more obligated to scrutinize qualified medical evaluators' opinions in their report, such as the causation opinion, such as the permanent and stationary opinion, such as the permanent impairment opinion, the apportionment opinion, to confirm or to determine whether those opinions qualify as substantial medical evidence. And there's a big push to train and educate qualified medical evaluators as to the necessity for providing opinions and conclusions that can be used to resolve the disputed issues. So that's the purpose of our discussion today, is to show you exactly how you would do this within the body of your report, and to give you some templates that you can use when it comes time for you to fashion your opinions and conclusions in your very next report. So let's just talk just a little bit about some philosophy of what constitutes a substantial opinion versus what constitutes a conclusory opinion only that cannot be used to resolve disputed issues. And let's look at some of the distinctions between conclusory opinions and substantial opinions. So when these cases that we're involved with, that involve injured workers, come down in front of workers' compensation judges or come to the Workers' Compensation Appeals Board, the case can only be resolved when the opinions and conclusions upon which disputed issues are resolved, only when those opinions constitute substantial medical evidence. And this is described in law and in case law. And specifically, the Garza case told us that any award any permanent disability award, any order, any decision, any compromise and release of the board must be supported by substantial evidence in light of the entire record. So in resolving disputed issues of these cases that we're involved in as the medical evaluators, the parties first look at our opinions and conclusions. They lay it out on the table, and they look at the opinions and conclusions, and the first scan that they do when evaluating our opinions and conclusions is to determine whether or whether not the opinion constitutes a substantial opinion. And a substantial opinion stands out like a sore thumb. Just as if you were looking across the playing field at kids playing basketball on a basketball court, and you saw that one kid had a blue basketball. That blue basketball would stand out among the sea of otherwise orange basketballs. Well, substantial opinions are the same way, and the parties scrutinize our opinion to first determine whether or not it constitutes a substantial opinion. If it's substantial, then they can look at the content of the opinion and decide whether to use that opinion. But the first analysis of the opinion involves a determination as to whether or not the opinion is a substantial opinion. So let's talk about what constitutes substantial opinions. In the Granado case informed us that a mere legal conclusion does not form a basis for a finding. And many qualified medical evaluators are well adept and very skilled at providing bare legal conclusions, also known as conclusory opinions, within the body of their reports. And I'll give you some examples of conclusory opinions here in just a minute. So just a conclusory opinion is not going to cut it and is not going to provide an opinion that can be used down at the board because it does not constitute a substantial opinion. In the Zemke case, Zemke informed us that an opinion that does not disclose its underlying basis, an opinion that does not disclose its underlying basis and gives a bare legal conclusion does not constitute substantial medical evidence. So in order to put the hockey puck in the net, in order to score points, in order to succeed, it's clear from the Zemke case that our reasoning must disclose its underlying basis. So you have to become comfortable and confident in disclosing the basis for your conclusion. How could you do that in the body of a report? If you think about that just a bit right now, how would that unfold within the body of your report? Might you say something in the body of your report such as, my basis for providing this conclusion includes, and then you could elaborate or disclose your underlying basis. So we're starting to see the coming together and the formulation of our opinions and conclusions by following the dictates of these already and well-established case laws. In the West case, they informed us that an expert opinion is no stronger than the facts upon which it is based. So in addition to disclosing our basis for our conclusion, the West case tells us that we must also provide the facts upon which our conclusion is based. And see, it's only when we disclose the basis and when we provide the facts upon which our conclusion is based can the parties then look at the opinion and use the opinion and can determine if the opinion is a true opinion, is a correct opinion, is an accurate opinion. An opinion becomes true, it becomes accurate, and it becomes correct when it has a logical basis, when it's supported by multiple voluminous and compelling facts. And I'll give you some examples as to that here in just a couple of minutes. Now, in addition to these cases, there's another case that gives us great insight as to how to formulate our opinions and conclusions such that they do indeed qualify as substantial medical evidence, and that is the Bassett case. Now the Bassett case is very, very illustrative for us, and the Bassett case tells us that the chief value of an expert's testimony, an expert such as us, in our case we're medical experts, so the chief value of the medical expert's testimony rests upon the material from which his or her opinion is fashioned. It's based on the material. There's no value in just the opinion. The value rests upon the material, the facts, and the basis upon which his or her opinion is fashioned, and the reasoning by which he or she progresses from the material to the conclusion. And it does not lie in the mere expression of the conclusion. It does not lie in the conclusory portion of the opinion. And as we're going to see, every opinion that you offer in the body of your report has two components. It has the conclusory portion of the opinion, wherein you provide us your actual opinion. And then the second part is the substantial portion of the opinion, wherein you provide the basis, you provide the facts upon which your opinion is based, and it's the conclusory, the substantial portion where you demonstrate the reasoning of how you progressed from the basis and from the facts to the conclusion. So this may sound complex and convoluted and difficult, but it's actually not. And I'm going to show you some very simple steps that you can use in these sections of your report wherein you provide opinions and conclusions. And I'm going to show you exactly how to demonstrate the party your reasoning and your progression from the material to the conclusion. And Bassett tells us that the opinion of the expert is no better than the reasons upon which it's based. And I want to share with you some ideas as to how you can demonstrate to the parties your compelling reasons that support your opinion and conclusion. So these are some important cases that give us some insight as to how to construct our opinions and conclusions in our reports. Well, probably the most influential case was the Escobedo case, and the Escobedo case made a clear distinction between conclusory opinions and substantial opinions, and gives us a formula, or gave us a formula, for exactly how to do these things that are only tangentially discussed in these other cases. It's the Escobedo case that shows us the exact formula, the exact recipe. So let's take a look now at what Escobedo has to say about conclusory versus substantial opinions, and then we'll start to put these cases together and start to formulate our own opinions and conclusions within the body of our reports. So what the Escobedo case and these other cases have in common is that they illuminate for us the distinction between conclusory opinions and substantial opinions, and they reinforce and reiterate one amongst each other that there is no value in conclusory opinions, and the only value in our opinions is if and when we can qualify those opinions as substantial opinions. And it's very, very interesting because in our regular life, and particularly in our social life, for example, we frequently communicate by the use of conclusory opinions. And we pay very little attention and put very little emphasis on qualifying our opinions and conclusions as substantial opinions and conclusions. And I want to give you an example. And I want you to imagine a situation where you're at a pizza party. I'm making this up. Imagine that it's Friday night after a long work week, and you meet up with some friends at a local pizza house, and you're having some refreshments and maybe some drinks and some pizza, and you're all having a good time, and the conversation turns to various current events and current affairs going on, and the conclusory opinions start flying around the table. And some examples of conclusory opinions could be, for example, if you're a sports fan, that Patrick Mahomes, quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback in the league. And one of your friends makes this conclusory opinion. Or Someone else at the table provides a conclusory opinion that people who get vaccinated are equally symptomatic with COVID-19 as are non-vaccinated people. And the discussion would ensue around that. And in a social setting, no one really ever pursues the authenticity or the accuracy of these opinions. We simply use them as cornerstones for our conversation. And these are conversation starters and conversation facilitators. And we do this all the time in the form of providing conclusory opinions in our conversation. Another example, for example, one of your dinner mates says to you that Amazon.com does not give the same level of service that it used to. And someone else around the table might say, yeah, I've noticed that. And someone else around the table could possibly state that, well, it seems like Amazon's been doing pretty good by me lately. And these are just conversation pieces. Well, in our reports, conclusory opinions don't cut it because the parties cannot use conclusory opinions only. Conclusory opinions may be fine at the pizza party, but they don't work in the resolution of disputed issues in front of workers' compensation judges or down at the appeals board. Now, these opinions, these conclusory opinions in a social setting can be made to be substantial opinions if you can push the provider of this opinion. So imagine that your friend says to you that Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback in the league. And you pushed him a little bit on that and you said something like, no, he's not the best quarterback in the league. Tom Brady is the best quarterback in the league. And we have conflicting and competing conclusory opinions. Well, imagine if your friend said, well, let me tell you why Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback in the league. He says things like Patrick Mahomes has a 2.79 interception rate percentage. His passing percentage is .902, the highest in the league. His time per possession is, such and such, and he provides you facts and facts and facts. And he challenges you on your facts as to why Tom Brady is the best quarterback in the league. It's the argument that has the most facts, the most bases, the most reasons in support of the fact that's the more likely true conclusion. Now, if you're a Tom Brady fan and you defend Tom Brady as the top quarterback in the league, but you have no facts that you can cite in support of that opinion or conclusion, well, the Patrick Mahomes argument is going to win the day. Similarly, for your friend who talks about people who get vaccinated, if she was to say, let me tell you why I say this. The facts upon which I rely include a recent study by the Centers for Disease Control, or a recent study out of the Mayo Clinic, or some recent statistics from Harvard Medical School, and the evidence upon which I base this is a report recently issued by the Fauci Institute, and she supports her conclusion with opinions and conclusions. Or your friend says Amazon does not give the same level of service, and let me tell you why. There was a recent study by Consumer Reports that showed that in 2019, average delivery time was 2.9 days for a package under 25 pounds, but in 2022, it's 3.4 days. And he tells you why he comes to this opinion and conclusion, and he gives you facts in support of his opinion and conclusion. The more facts and the more support that conclusory opinion has, the more likely true, accurate, and correct is that opinion and conclusion. And in fact, if Amazon had those actual statistics that showed a worsening in their time schedule, they would certainly address that because the facts are the facts. Okay? So let's talk about how you can do this in the body of your report. In the three principal sections in your report, meaning the causation section of the report, the permanent impairment section of the report, and the apportionment section of your report, such that you can win the argument in support of your opinion or conclusion, whatever that may be. So imagine this. It's QME report time, and you have a designated day, date, and time to sit down and work on your report, and you get out all your materials in front of you, and you sit down to tackle the final discussion section of your report. In other words, all of the initial sections of the report, including all of your examination findings, your diagnoses, and all that is already entered in the report. And now it's time for you to address the discussion section of your report. And you pull out your attorney cover letters or your claims administrator cover letters, and as the parties are increasingly doing, they remind us of our obligations under CCR 35.5 by actually quoting it within the body of the cover letter. And CCR 35.5 tells us that the reporting evaluator, which is us, shall attempt to address each question raised by each party in the issue cover letter or cover letters sent to the evaluator. So you're looking at the questions from the attorney cover letters, and you realize that it's time to get down to work. It's time to put on your thinking cap, and you're now being asked by the parties to do your job. You're now being asked to earn your money. You're now being asked to be a big boy or a big girl and actually resolve disputed issues. Now, this is where many qualified medical evaluators shrink and shirk and look for ways to avoid their obligation, to avoid their duty, to avoid actually doing the job of resolving the disputed issues. But you don't need to do that, and you don't need to resort to that tactic moving forward. You can now resolve the disputed issues the first time through with the formula I'm going to share with you now. So let's pick off one at a time these issues: causation, permanent impairment, and apportionment of the permanent impairment. And I'm going to share with you some ideas as to how you can quickly, easily, accurately, and correctly resolve these disputed issues related to each of these particular potential issues in dispute. Okay, so you sit down at your computer and you have all your materials, including the cover letters, with you, and you see that one of the attorneys asked you a question regarding causation, and it states, for example, did the applicant sustain an industrial injury as a result of a specific injury, as a result of continuous trauma, or both? Please explain the basis for your determination. And here, the attorney is asking you to qualify your opinion as substantial. He's not just asking for a yes or no question, yes or no response to this question. You'll notice that this is actually a yes or no question, correct? Did the applicant sustain an injury? That's a yes or no question. So that gives you some clue as to your answer. Your answer is going to be either a yes or no answer, but you're also going to have to provide the basis for your determination. Well, how can you do that? Well, you do it by following the formula. You first provide the conclusory portion of the opinion, and then you qualify that opinion with the substantial portion of the opinion by explaining your reasons, your basis, your facts, and your progression from the material to the conclusion. So in the body of the report, let me show you exactly how that would look. This is where the coach says, let me show you how to take the hockey puck, take it down, beat the defenseman, beat the goalie, and score a goal. Okay, so this is exactly how you can do this in the body of your report. So you start by providing the conclusory portion of the opinion, and you state that, in my opinion, at least within reasonable medical probability, the symptoms that Mr. Jones reports in his lower back are, or your opinion might be that they are not, the result of an industrial injury. And let's say, for example, that your conclusion is that his lower back pain symptoms are not the result of an industrial injury. So you would say they are not the result of an industrial injury. They are not the result of an industrial injury, either specific or due to cumulative trauma with ABC Enterprises. Now remember, CCR 35.5 says that we as the qualified medical evaluators are to answer the questions that the parties ask us. So let's take a look at what he's asking in this question. He wants to know, is the injury a result of a specific injury? Is it the result of a continuous trauma, or is it the result of both? So here, notice that this answer addresses both specific and cumulative. So this is how you can fashion your responses such that the parties actually get the answers that they're seeking. Let's take a look at it. It says, in my opinion, within reasonable medical probability, the symptoms that Mr. Jones reports, Mr. Jones is coming in talking about all kinds of back pain. The symptoms that he reports in his lower back are not the result of an industrial injury. It's not the result of a specific incident of injury on 1/1/20 as Mr. Jones alleges, and it's not due to cumulative trauma with ABC Enterprises. So always make sure that the conclusory portion of your opinion answers the specific questions. If you don't address specific and you don't address cumulative, you haven't actually provided an accurate response to the attorney's question. Okay? So that's the conclusory portion of the opinion. Let's now substantiate. Let's just now provide some substance to that opinion through the substantial portion of the opinion. So in addition to providing the conclusory portion of the opinion, the attorney cover letter implored you to provide the basis or bases for your conclusion. Now in this case, you actually have two conclusions. You have a conclusion regarding an allegation of a specific incident of injury. You have a conclusion regarding an allegation of a cumulative trauma incident or injury. And your bases that supports your conclusions should address both of these questions, both of these concerns, correct? In other words, your response in the conclusory portion of the opinion had two conclusions, that there was no specific injury and that there was no cumulative trauma injury. How can you then qualify the conclusory portion of your opinion as substantial? Well, you have to provide bases and reasonings for both conclusions. So how would that look in the body of your report? You would tell the parties, my bases for these conclusions, plural, include, and here's my basis for conclusion number 1, which relates to the specific injury, meaning that I opined that there was not a specific incident of injury to be responsible for Mr. Smith's low back pain complaints. And here you cite reason number 1, reason number 2, reason number 3, reason number 4. And here you must provide voluminous and compelling reasons to support your opinion that Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback in the league, or that Amazon.com's service is not as efficient as it once was. And the more compelling and the more voluminous are your reasons, the more irrefutable is your conclusion, and the more likely true, accurate, and correct is your conclusion. Now, as you look at your reasons must support the conclusion. So your reasons have to be reasons that explain your conclusion of no specific injury. That's how you marry your reasoning to the conclusion. It's the reasons support the conclusion. They're not just reasons. They have to be reasons that support the conclusion. So when you read your reasons, if you're not convinced yourself that those reasons are strong reasons to support the opinion, then it's likely that the opinion is not the true, accurate, and correct and natural response, the natural resolution of the disputed issue. If you're not convinced yourself, change your conclusion to a conclusion that you can support with reasons. This is how substantial medical evidence becomes a medical decision-making system. You only provide the decision, the medical decision, you only provide the decision that passes through the system. The system is, if you can't come up with compelling reasons to support the conclusion, that conclusion can't be true. Can't be true. So look for the decision, look for the conclusion that's true. And you'll know it's true because you can cite your bases, you can cite facts, you can cite compelling reasons in support of the opinion and conclusion. Now you do the same thing for your conclusion about the continuous trauma injury allegation, and you would provide compelling and voluminous reasons as to why the symptoms in Mr. Smith's lower back cannot be due to a continuous trauma injury as alleged. And as you look at your reasons, if you're not convinced that your reasons are compelling, that your conclusion is therefore supportable and supported, then look for a different conclusion for which you can provide more reasons, for which you can cite relevant facts, for which you can provide your bases. And in this way, substantial medical evidence becomes a medical decision-making system that will work for you every time and will never fail you. Okay? So that's some examples as to how to do this for the causation section of your report. Let's talk about now the permanent impairment section of your report. Now, when it comes to your permanent impairment rating, in every single case that involves a represented injured worker, the applicant attorney is going to insist that you address an alternative impairment rating under Alvarez and Guzman. So your permanent impairment rating in every single case that involves a permanent impairment opinion, your permanent impairment discussion is going to, by necessity and by law, require that you address two issues. Number one, the strict impairment rating under the strict interpretation of the AMA guides. That's number one. And then number two, an alternative impairment rating under Alvarez and Guzman. So if you have an examinee who you believe has permanent residuals from the industrial injury, you're required to address permanent impairment, and you're required to address two components of the permanent impairment: the strict rating under the AMA guides and an alternative rating under Alvarez and Guzman. Thus, a substantial opinion on permanent impairment involves both components: a strict impairment rating under the AMA guides and an alternative impairment rating under Alvarez and Guzman. Now, you don't have to always provide an alternative impairment rating under Alvarez and Guzman if you believe that the strict impairment rating is accurate, but you're required to indicate to the parties and evidence to the parties that you at least considered an alternative impairment rating under Alvarez and Guzman. So I want to spend a little bit of time on how to qualify your opinions and conclusions on permanent impairment by specifically looking at an alternative impairment rating under Alvarez and Guzman. Because if you provide an alternative impairment rating under Alvarez and Guzman, not only does that opinion have to qualify as substantial medical evidence, okay, as does any permanent impairment rating that you offer, it not only has to qualify as substantial medical evidence, but it also has its own formula, its own specific and unique formula by law, that the alternative impairment rating must follow in order for the alternative impairment rating to qualify as substantial medical evidence. And this is a very strict and tight requirement because an alternative impairment rating has the net effect of increasing, generally in 99% of cases, of increasing the examinee's permanent impairment rating. Some alternative impairment ratings provide for a doubling, a tripling, even a quadrupling of the impairment rating that's provided for under the strict application of the AMA guides. So it's essential that if you provide an alternative impairment rating under Alvarez and Guzman, that alternative impairment rating follow the specific formula to qualify it as a substantial impairment rating. And I want to share with you exactly how to do that in this section of today's discussion. So a consideration of Alvarez-Guzman alternative impairment ratings is required in every single case that involves permanent impairment, because this consideration of an alternative impairment rating contributes to what's referred to as a complete medical evaluation. So we're now required in every case to go through the AMA guides and to go through our mental Rolodex and think to ourselves, is it possible that there's another chart, another chapter, another table within the AMA guides that could possibly be a more accurate description of the examinee's impairment? Because our job as qualified medical evaluators is to most accurately describe the examinee's permanent impairment rating so that that permanent impairment rating can be plugged in to the schedule down at the disability evaluation unit. An inaccurate permanent impairment rating is going to provide for a permanent disability rating or permanent disability percentage that's inaccurate and does injustice or does not do justice to the injured worker. So in order to do justice and to do the proper thing for the examinee, it's critical that we accurately describe the permanent impairment in every single case. And that involves a consideration of alternative impairment ratings in addition to the impairment ratings that are provided under the strict application of the AMA guides. And this is clearly described in the Guzman decision, which tells us to accommodate those complex or extraordinary cases. And in the Guzman decision, they referred to complex or extraordinary cases as those cases where the permanent impairment rating is either not listed in the AMA guides or is not clearly described in the AMA guides. But this now applies to all cases. The AMA guides calls for the physician's exercise of clinical judgment to evaluate the impairment most accurately. Most accurately. We're required to most accurately describe the impairment, even if that is possible, only by resorting to comparable conditions described in other charts, other chapters, and other tables of the AMA guides. So in every single case that involves a permanent impairment rating, you must provide an opinion as to whether whether an alternative impairment rating under Alvarez and Guzman would be more accurate, or whether an alternative impairment rating under Alvarez and Guzman is not more accurate. So we're required to consider the entire range of permanent impairments that may apply to our examinee in every single case that involves permanent impairment. So even if you do not use an alternative impairment rating to describe the examinee's impairment, you still need to show the parties that you considered the range of impairments that could be applicable to the examinee. And here's how you can do that in your report. You create a section in your report with this heading, Alternative Impairment Rating under Alvarez and Guzman. And this would go directly underneath the permanent impairment heading in your report. So let me rephrase that. In your report, you have a topic heading entitled Permanent Impairment, under which you would elaborate on all the permanent impairments that relate to your examinee under the strict application of the AMA guides. And you would do a fabulous job in that section of your report. You would sum it up, total it up, and provide the parties with a final permanent impairment rating under the strict application of the AMA guides. Well, then under that section, also under the permanent impairment section of the report, this is a subheading under the permanent impairment major heading in your report, you provide this topic heading, Alternative Impairment Rating under Alvarez and Guzman. You would simply say something similar to the following. In my opinion, and within reasonable medical probability, the above permanent impairment rating under the strict application of the AMA guides is the most accurate description of Mrs. Smith's impairment. I do not find a need to consult with other charts, tables, or chapters within the AMA guides to more accurately describe the impairment. And this statement is satisfactory to demonstrate to the parties that you indeed considered other charts, other tables, other chapters, other methods within the AMA guides, and even though you did so, you believe that the permanent impairment rating provided for by the schedule under the strict application of the guides is the most accurate description of the impairment. Now, in the contrary, if you believe an alternative impairment rating applies to the examinee and you decide to provide for an alternative impairment rating under Alvarez and Guzman, that opinion would also go under this same topic heading, alternative impairment rating under Alvarez and Guzman, but your description of it would be greatly, greatly different, of course. And your description of the alternative impairment rating has to satisfy several important criteria in order for that alternative impairment rating to qualify as substantial medical evidence and in order for it to be upheld by the parties. So let's go into that discussion now as to how to provide for alternative impairment ratings that will be upheld by the parties and that do qualify as substantial medical evidence. So let's talk about substantial medical evidence. So here's the magic formula. This was described in the Kramer versus County of Sonoma case. In order to properly rate using Alvarez and Guzman, the doctor is expected to do some certain things, and I'll explain those to you in just a second. So I want you to imagine your report. In the permanent impairment section of your report, under the heading permanent impairment, you're going to go ahead and provide the permanent impairment rating under the strict application of the AMA guides. And you're going to go through your normal methodology as to how the AMA guides would rate a certain condition in the chapter associated with that condition, using the charts and tables that describe impairments associated with that condition. So you're going to go through your entire formulation of providing a strict rating per the AMA guides. And that is step number 1. Then underneath that whole discussion, you're going to create a new subheading, and this is under the main topic heading of permanent impairment. So the subheading is alternative impairment rating under Alvarez and Guzman. And in this section, this subsection under the permanent impairment section of your report, you're going to, number 1, you're going to reiterate your strict rating that you came up with in the preceding section of your report. So you might simply say something similar to the following. In my opinion, Mrs. Smith's impairment rating under the strict application of the AMA guides is 16% whole person impairment, period. See discussion above. And you refer the reader of your report to the section above wherein you went through the entire formulation as to how you arrive at the permanent impairment rating of 16% whole person. Then in a new paragraph, you're going to go through step number 2 in the procedure to properly rate using Alvarez and Guzman. Step number 2 is you're going to explain to the parties why the strict rating does not accurately reflect the applicant's disability. Now, your reasoning why the strict rating is not accurate had better be good. It had better be good. It has to be good. It has to be good reasons. You need to have multiple, voluminous, and compelling reasons as to why the strict rating is not accurate. Now, more important than voluminous reasons are compelling reasons. I suggest that your reasons be voluminous and compelling. Now, this is where the litmus truth test comes into play. This is where your opinion starts passing through those filters that I was talking about earlier in the discussion. If you're not able to come up with voluminous and compelling reasons as to why the strict rating is not accurate, then guess what? The strict rating is accurate. If you don't have reasons as to why it's not accurate, then by default, by prima facie evidence according to the law, then the strict rating is the most accurate. So your reasons here have to be good. Has to be good. You have to be able to convince yourself. When you review this section in your report, you have to be able to convince yourself that the reasons that you provided are good, that they're compelling, that they're convincing. Now, these reasons are not simply restatements of facts. You have to explain why these facts contribute to a rating that's not accurate, and it has to be good. Once you're done with that, then you go through step 3 in the procedure for properly rating under Alvarez and Guzman, and that is to now provide the parties with an alternative rating within the 4 corners of the AMA guides. So herein is where you have the opportunity to go ahead and provide the rating that you feel is a more accurate rating, whether that be a rating in a different chapter, whether it be simply a rating within the same chapter but using a different method, whether it be a rating method that applies a set of different rules that are typically associated with a chart or a table in the AMA guides. Whatever your alternative methodology is, this is where you have an opportunity to provide it to the parties. And then finally, in a separate paragraph, so these are all in separate paragraphs, in a final paragraph, you have to explain to the parties why that alternative impairment rating most accurately reflects the applicant's level of disability. Most accurate. In other words, why is it more accurate than the impairment rating that's provided for under the strict application of the AMA guides? And here you must have voluminous and compelling reasons, and they better be good. They better be good. You yourself have to convince yourself that these reasons are good first. If you yourself are unconvinced, guess what the parties will be? Do you think the parties will be convinced that they should adopt your doubling, your tripling, your quadrupling, your more favorable result, your more desirable alternative impairment rating? Do you think the parties are going to accept it and adopt it with its doubling, tripling, and quadrupling of costs if the reasons behind it are not good? They have to be good. You have to be convinced yourself first before you can attempt to convince the parties. Now, if you're not able to provide multiple and compelling reasons as to why the alternative impairment rating is more accurate, then guess what? It's not more accurate. Unless it can be supported by compelling reasons, then the strict application rating by default is the more accurate rating. So don't provide an alternative impairment rating unless you have reasons in support of the rating. An alternative impairment rating without compelling and voluminous reasons is simply a conclusory opinion that does not qualify as a substantial opinion, and it will properly be rejected by the parties. So imagine this. Let's go back to your report now. Let's take a look at your report. In your report, this section would be formatted somewhat as follows. So this is under a separate subheading in your report entitled Alternative Impairment Rating under Alvarez and Guzman. Step number 1. In my opinion, the above permanent impairment rating, In my opinion, Mrs. Smith qualifies for 16% whole person impairment rating under the strict application of the AMA guides, period. See discussion above. There's step 1. New paragraph. In my opinion, the above impairment rating of 16% whole person impairment is not the most accurate reflection of Mrs. Smith's true impairment, period. Reasons for this conclusion include, new line, bullet point, reason number 1, and explain the reason why it's not accurate.
Reason number 2, explain why it's not accurate. Reason number 3, explain why. And the more reasons and the more compelling are your reasons, the better. Step number 3, in my opinion, Mrs. Smith's impairment rating is most accurately described as such and such, and you go here into the chart, table, or chapter of the AMA guides that more accurately describes the impairment rating and give the final percentage of the rating. Finally, step number 4, in my opinion, the above alternative impairment rating of, let's say, 30% whole person impairment is the most accurate description of Mrs. Smith's impairment, period. Reasons for this conclusion include : new line, reason number 1, and explain why the alternative impairment rating is most accurate. Reason number 2, explain why it's most accurate. Reason number 3, explain why. And the more reasons, the more voluminous reasons, and the more compelling are the reasons, the more accurate and the more truthful and the more appropriate is the alternative impairment rating compared to the strict rating under the scheduled rating of the AMA guides. So doctors, can you see how this 4-step procedure that we use to qualify the opinion as substantial medical evidence, can you see how this serves as a series of truth filters? If your opinion as to why the strict rating is not accurate, if your opinion is not true, it'll get clogged right here because it's not supported by reasons. If you are able to support the opinion with reasons, then the opinion passes through the filter. Then, if you're not able to provide an alternative impairment rating that's supported by multiple and voluminous reasons, the opinion gets stuck right here. It doesn't pass through the filter as to why, the why filter. It gets stuck in the why that alternative rating most accurately reflects applicant's level of disability filter. Only an opinion that's supported by multiple, voluminous, and compelling reasons can pass through the filter to drop out the bottom as an opinion that qualifies as a substantial opinion, which is an opinion that can be used by the parties. So you need to go through this procedure with every single case and decide for yourself if you're going to provide an alternative impairment rating based upon whether or not the opinion successfully passes through the truth filters. And the litmus test as to the substantiability of the opinion is the voluminous and compelling reasons. They have to be compelling reasons.
Okay, so our reports are getting better already, and we now have some solid systems as to completing the causation and permanent impairment sections of a report. What about the apportionment sections of our reports? It seems that the apportionment section of the report is the section over which doctors struggle the greatest. And I have to be honest with you, I myself even find the apportionment section of the report to be grueling and very difficult. But it need not be so difficult if you follow the exact formula, because the exact formula that's described in the Escobedo case will bring you to the natural, correct, accurate, and true conclusion in every single case if you'll just use the formula. So again, like our opinions and the causation section of our report and our opinion within the permanent impairment section of our report, our opinion begins with the conclusory portion of the opinion. And the conclusory portion of the opinion is where you tell the parties your apportionment approximate percentages. So it would go like this: in my opinion, and within reasonable medical probability, 80% of the permanent impairment is due to the industrial injury, and 20% of the permanent impairment is due to non-industrial other factors. And here we're talking about, one specific body part. Your apportionment approximate percentages for different body parts could differ. They don't have to be the same body part to body part to body part. This is just a simple example involving one body part, where 80% of the impairment is industrial, 20% is non-industrial, and this constitutes the conclusory portion of the opinion. The substantial portion of the opinion comes next, when you provide the reasons for this conclusion include, and here you give the parties your substance. You make the opinion substantial by giving relevant facts, how and why reasoning, etc. Now, notice, like the causation section of the report, in the example we had a specific incident of injury and an allegation of cumulative trauma, and we addressed both of those in our conclusion. In providing our reasons for this conclusion, we have to provide two sets of reasons. Reasons for the 80% and reasons for the 20%. We have to explain to the parties why 80% of this impairment needs to be compensated for from the claims payer. And we have to explain to the applicant attorney why 20% of the impairment has to be absorbed by the examinee, by their client. So both parties are going to look to both of these numbers, and they're going to look to your reasons in support of those numbers. And that's where the substantial portion of your conclusion comes in, and you explain to the parties why, in your opinion, 80% of the impairment is industrial and 20% is non-industrial. And let's see how that would look within the body of our report. So in the body of your report, in providing your reasons for this conclusion, with regards to the 80% industrial, your report might look something like this. Reasons for this conclusion include, and here you would give us all of your multiple, compelling, and voluminous reasons. And you would give us the facts, the pertinent facts. The facts relevant to the above apportionment approximate percentage upon which I rely include, and here you would cite your facts. Now the facts are going to differ on a case-by-case basis, but some of the facts that are relevant to the apportionment approximate percentages might be facts relevant to the mechanism of injury, might be facts relevant to the response to appropriate medical care, where an examinee who has a minimal mechanism of injury but fails to respond to appropriate and adequate medical treatment and still has permanent impairment at the conclusion of appropriate medical treatment, well, perhaps a large portion of the permanent impairment could be due to other factors. So other facts that might be relevant might be the presence or absence of pre-existing conditions, prior industrial injuries, and these are just some examples, but it's in this section of the report where you provide your facts to support your conclusion for 80% industrial, and then the same process would repeat itself for your conclusion that 20% of the permanent impairment is non-industrial, and you would give us the pertinent facts relevant to the 20% apportionment approximate percentage, and you would give all of the facts and all of the reasons as to why you feel that 1/5, 20% of the permanent impairment that the examinee is left with is going to have to be absorbed by the examinee. In other words, is non-compensable by the claims payer. And this is how you qualify your apportionment approximate percentages as substantial. This is how you qualify your opinion as a substantial opinion. So doctors, I hope this helps you. You know, the concept of substantial medical evidence is not that difficult after all. And as you begin to implement these suggestions within the bodies of your own reports, and as you begin to use the medical decision-making system of substantial medical evidence, you're going to find yourself adopting a whole new way of thinking, even in your life outside of your career as a qualified medical evaluator. You're going to begin to no longer accept the conclusory opinions of persons in your social life, in your personal life, in your business life, you're going to start demanding that persons qualify their opinions as substantial evidence. Imagine, for example, that someone, a roofing contractor, comes out to your house to do a free roofing estimate and comes to your front door and explains to you that you need a new roof. He provides a conclusory opinion, you need a new roof. You're going to start demanding from that contractor, well, why do you say that? What are your reasons in support of the conclusion that I need a new roof? What is your basis for telling me that I need a new roof? How do you come to the conclusion from just walking around my house, right? The material, the progression from the material to the conclusion. How did you progress to the conclusion that I need a new roof when all you did was walk around my house? And this is just an example. But it's an example of how you can use the concept of substantial medical evidence not only in your QME reporting, but also in your everyday life. And it's actually a very effective and useful concept. And once you begin adopting this into your very next QME reporting, you're going to find that it becomes easier and easier and easier, and it will become naturally right for you to qualify each and every opinion in the body of your report as substantial medical evidence. So doctors, I hope this helps you, and I hope this helps to contribute to a better system in California where qualified medical evaluators reports can actually be used in the resolution of disputed issues. What a concept. So doctors, I want to thank you for joining me on today's discussion. I look forward to being with you on future discussions as well. And I want to compliment you for your dedication and your commitment to excellence. And I want to thank you for your sincere and enduring service to California's injured workers. For now, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter, wishing you best success in your career as a qualified medical